So we have the pleasure here to have with us today Mr. Christian Noyer. Christian Noyer has been many things in his life, many important things in the French government, where he has chaired a number of very top positions in the French Treasury. He has been one of the actors of the recent stage of the European Union. In his position as General Director of the Treasury, his position as Governor of the Banco de France. But he is still on board because after leaving the Banque de France, he has been appointed honoraire gouverneur of the Banque de France, and now the President of the Republic has asked him to share and direct all the studies around the Brexit, which means the future of Europe in a sense. So welcome here in Madrid. It's a very honor to have you here, Christian.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me.
So probably my first question for you will be, how do you see things around Brexit, which I understand is not only Brexit but is something more, no?
Well, I think what is extremely important is to safeguard the logics of the European Union and of the single market. So when we look at the logics of building up the single market and also the precedents we have, for instance, with countries of the European Economic Area, we see that having full access to the market relies on, in fact, three conditions, and that is very logical. The first condition is that you have to follow the same rules, the same regulations. Norway follows exactly the same directives or regulations as the European Union. And you do that under the control of the Court of Justice, the European Court of Justice, so that we have really a single regulatory system and judiciary system. The second condition is that you have to take your share of the general costs of running the Union. And that means taking a fair share of the EU budget. And Norway does contribute to the EU budget to a sizable amount. And even a country like Switzerland, which has only a limited agreement with for having access to the single market, does pay a significant contribution to the EU budget. And of course, the last condition is what we call the four freedoms. If you want the freedom for goods, services, and capital, then you have also to accept the freedom for people. That's at the roots of the European Union. So I think what is important is that we can ensure that we keep those fundamentals of the European Union. Otherwise, the EU would be in danger itself, and that's for me the basis for any possible agreement with the UK.
Okay, that's very clear. But is that the sentiment in many people? Is that, or the idea has been such that most of the people consider that Brexit is not a very good thing for the European Union. How do you feel in terms of your sentiment about the possibilities it may open and the dangers it may entail?
Well, the dangers were clear. That is that for the first time since we started the European Union, we have a country leaving. So the danger was, of course, that it would set an example, and that instead of continuing to build something with more participants and then deeper integration, the reverse would start to display, and all the more that it was at the time where there were many pressures from what are often called populist movements or nationalistic movements, and there were fears in several countries with various movements, rather on the left or on the right, and that included France, but you had also in Spain, in the Netherlands, in Germany, in many others, that sort of fear. And I hope now that with the votes in the Netherlands and in France in particular, that we are moving in the other direction, so that in the end the dangers would not be so important. The opportunity for me is mostly that I think we have suffered from having a big difference, which tended to be structural between the EU and the euro area, and that meant that to build to start some budget of the EU European of the euro area was difficult, because many people were saying, but the EU budget does exist, and the relevant level is the EU, and for many things there was a sort of inconsistency. Now, with the prospect of the UK leaving the EU, at least we will have only countries, with the exception of Denmark, but Denmark is so much linked to the euro area that it does not matter really. But all countries will be either members of the euro, of the monetary union, economic and monetary union, or they will be committed to come at a certain point. So that's the long-term trend should be to reunify the EU and the euro area, and I think that is a good prospect, because on this basis we can build better institutions, closer integration, and coherence of our continent.
Mr. Noyer, you come from Paris, and we have been following, as you can imagine, the events this year in France, probably more than any other European country, if I may say, if only because for us the situation of France as almost a natural and geographic link with the rest of Europe is very, very important. We are so much relaxed of what has happened. Are we okay in being that relaxed with the news? And is really this an opportunity for France and thus for the rest of Europe to build something different with the new government and the situation of the legislative that happened yesterday in the first tour, at least?
Well, I think so. I do hope so, but I really think so, and probably for two main reasons. One is that France has elected a president who took the risk, so to say, to be very pro-European during his campaign, at the time where many other candidates or parties were against Europe, and the other most pro-Europeans were a bit timid on EU issues, on European issues. He was clearly and openly pro-European, and that has been vindicated. Has been elected with a wide majority, and from the parliamentary first ballot of elections yesterday, we see that he will suddenly get a very strong majority. So France is again will be very pro-European, and I hope this will foster all those in Europe who are pro-European, who want to build something, to make new steps. That's first good news. The second is that he also took the risk to commit himself to deep structural reforms, starting with the labor market, but also in other fields, in trying to have a more pro-business tax regime, for instance, or in general regulatory system. And that is also very good news, because I expect that to foster growth in France. And I mean, France is geographically between Spain and Germany, and we have had good results economically in Spain and Germany, thanks to, I think, good economic policies and strong reforms made in Spain. So if we have those three major countries pushing ahead the growth of the euro area and the European Union, then we can really start a series, I hope, of very good economic years, significantly tackle unemployment and the output gap. There is all the gap we have between where our output, our economic output should be and our employment should be and the situation today. And that the best way certainly to convince the people in European countries that Europe is a good concept.
Yeah. One of the things that in Spain was a few months ago very relevant, and which probably is one of the bases of optimism in the new movements, is that this idea, also pushed by President Hollande, to put together, close together into a more deep conversation, at least the 4 or 5 major economies in Western Europe, so as to create a noyau dur, a sort of sufficient area of the euro area to push reforms. Is this, in your opinion, something that is going to continue? Because for us it would be important, because we have been somehow apart from that move in the last years, if only because our economic situation was really very poor and we had other things to take care of before trying to do a major step forward.
I think that, of course, the major countries in Europe have a specific role and duty to take the lead for making new steps. I don't think, by the way, that the smaller countries should be seen as negligible. They sometimes have very good ideas, and they must be part of the discussions and of the building up. But it's true that sometimes new initiatives are easier to be thought of by a small number of people than if you embark the major countries. It normally creates a movement that can be followed. So I can imagine that, yes, that should be part of the efforts to restart new steps in the building up of the EU and of the euro area.
Another topic that has been in the news in the press in Spain in the last weeks, unfortunately, has been some link with the bad situation of some banks, particularly Banco Popular, who finally disappeared and was bought by Santander after probably what was the first intervention of the new resolution mechanisms imposed. This is something that has created some tension in the financial sector in Spain, if only because we thought at some point that the major reforms were already implemented and that the whole thing was going in the right direction with the economy. In the positive side is that the mechanism has worked very well, very efficiently in only a few hours. In the negative side is that it means that probably not everything has been completed yet in terms of restructuring. But my question would be for you is, what are the main elements that are still to be put in place when we see this type of situations? Is there anything that's still lacking in the creation of the European Banking Union, or are we already with a sufficient institutional background so as to work on those type of problems?
Well, first, I think that the banking union is really an extremely important concept. It was difficult to have for an indefinite period an economic and monetary union without banking union. And we have seen during the crisis, although it was not a problem at the beginning, and that was relatively fluent, but we saw during the crisis that the tendency to look at the links between the governments and their budgets and the banking sector was a dangerous thing. It went both ways. By the way, in some countries, the banks created the problem for the government. In other countries, the government weakness, public finance weakness, created the problem for the banks. But it's true that we should get out of that. The banking union is certainly the answer. We have started to build the first pillar with supervision, which seems to be running extremely well now. Maybe it's to my own taste, it's a little bit too centralized at the ECB. What is important that the ECB can give instructions throughout the system. And the only thing that I think the ECB still needs to do is to ensure what existed at the beginning, before the crisis, at the beginning of the European and Monetary Union, that is the singleness of the money market, an absolute freedom to move capital between member states, even when it's interbank operations. There are still some restrictions in some countries, not to get in but to get out, and I think the ECB should take care of that as soon as possible. Because we cannot work an EMU without a totally unified money market. But all in all, the first pillar is largely built. The second pillar that is resolution, was in theory built, but it had not been really tested. And in that sense, the story of the resolution of Banco Popular is an extremely important test. It worked very well, and it worked quickly. And seen from the outside, I'm not sure how it was felt in Spain, but seen from the outside, not only was it done swiftly and successfully, but without creating any tensions outside the precise case. And the precise case was dealt with so quickly that there was no time for pressures and fears in the market. So it is seen really internationally as a real success. Maybe next time we have a problem of that sort, we should also not only think of all the banks of the same country as possible takers of the responsibility of the bank that has to be merged, to be integrated in a group, but we should make sure that there is a little bit of competition and possibilities for cross-border mergers and acquisitions. And in all sides, I mean, I don't have a precise thing in mind, but I think speaking more generally, and to ensure that, we should probably look very closely at some of the regulations which seem to consider that when you invest, for instance, from Spain to France, or from Germany to Spain, or from Italy to the Netherlands, you are investing as a bank in a different country, and that requires more capital than if you invest in your own country. This is ridiculous. We have a banking union, we have an economic and monetary union. It is the same economic area, and there should be absolutely no difference. The last pillar, which is still very much in the making and will require a few years, is deposit insurance. Which is there not to really should not be seen as something that will have to play a lot. It should, if possible, never play, but to give total confidence to the depositors in the absence of risk when you make a deposit with a bank, and freeing completely the governments from interventions per se. So a deposit insurance should rely mostly on pre-funding by the banking system of all the banking union, and if necessary for a very temporary intervention, it should be an EU fund like the EMS, for instance. I think that would be well designed. So we have to finish that. The sooner, the better, in my view.
Yeah, my following question was in at least I think in the same direction, is the idea that Even from a commercial point of view, I think we lack the idea of a unified retail banking system in Europe. I don't know exactly what could be the main elements that could foster that, because having the same, first knowing most of the main banks in Europe, having the same currency, having the same banking rules, having almost the same legal system nationally, it should be pretty easy to go from that point to a point on which you can have the same type of activity in other countries. The idea in one of the directives was at the beginning to have freedom of access to services. It hasn't played any role in the banking because everybody likes to have the bank as close as possible, but that has created some too nationalistic banking systems, at least in the major countries. How can we go from there to really a unify banking model without necessarily having to acquire big banks, which create other type of problems because of regulatory issues and supervision issues? What would be the next step or the next steps to go from where we are now to that unified retail banking system?
Well, the retail banking requires a presence so far, but I will correct that in a minute. So it's difficult to have the diversified retail banking system without acquisitions or mergers. It's not necessarily an acquisition of a smaller by a bigger, but or a weaker by a stronger. It can be also mergers being more or less equals. We have not yet seen that, but that should develop over time. But when I look at what those kind of mergers can give, I mean, paradoxically, Santander is a retail bank in the UK, and HSBC is a retail bank in France, simply because they have made acquisitions that give them access to a retail network. And BNP Paribas is clearly a retail bank in Belgium via Fortis, and one of the most important. So you can have that sort of things. That can be developed also more progressively via agreements, for instance, or in consumer finance. You can develop by a sort of alliance on a specific subsidiary that works for both networks, and then start to integrate function by function certain aspect. And I think there are prospects, for instance, in between French banks and Spanish banks of that kind of thing. A second avenue to do that is via the new technologies. Of course, it might be totally different in a few years from now, the way consumers are linked to their banks. They might have they might wish to access a wider range of possibilities that can be done via the internet with relatively limited presence of branches, and it could maybe redistribute a little bit the possibilities, having, for instance, more Spanish banks with French customers, more French banks with Spanish customers, simply because it takes less time and investments and difficulties than to develop a classical network of branches.
Okay, thank you. My very last question is probably the most difficult one. Is how do you see from your position the situation of Spain, and what would be, if any, advices or at least things you would say Spain should do or should improve or should contribute with? What would be your comment on this? I know it's difficult being here, but but we always like to have opinion of others.
When we look at Spain from outside, at least inside Europe, but I know that it's shared by more than just Europeans. What has been really remarkable is the way that suddenly under pressure of events and markets, but whatever, Spain has been able to implement strong structural reforms, readjust the basis of production costs, and take a new start. And of course, the crisis has been very painful in Spain. But when we look at the rate of growth of Spain since then, since the reforms were done, I think it is seen in France, for instance, as really, and I know it's the same in Germany, it is seen really as a demonstration that if you do bold reforms, you get a new start and the economy changes completely of speed of growth, and the acceleration is much easier. So I think that's an extremely important thing. There were weaknesses in the banking sector, which were in particular due to the crisis. I mean, and what led to the crisis, that is excessive importance given to real estate and construction in general, but this has been corrected. I mean, the way the problem of the cajas was treated, I think, was an extremely good example of a bold restructuring. You can always have one or two weaknesses that stay there, but if you have good tools to solve them, and we saw that with Banco Popular, it's being done. It's all related, of course, to the importance of non-performing loans, which is normal after a deep crisis. So no, I think what is important is to be able to continue to implement reforms as needed, but mostly keep what has been done and stick to that, and be patient, because even with a strong growth, it might take a few years to come down to a level of unemployment which would be acceptable and normal. And of course, if similar acceleration takes place in other major countries in Europe, that will help Spain, because we help each other when there is acceleration in the different parts of the same economic union.
Okay, Mr. Noyer, thank you a lot to have accepted to come here and have this interview. And I can assure you that for us it's a pleasure to have you here and visiting in Madrid, in Spain.
Well, thank you very much once again for your invitation. I can assure you it's a pleasure to be in Madrid today. Thank you.